It's lovely to see everyone. Great to see you all. We're running a few minutes late because I understand there's been a small disaster in the kitchen. The coffee machine broke down. So this is our first gathering, everyone, since 2019. And I'm sure you'll all agree it's a welcome from Zoom meetings. I think we've all had just about enough of those. So we have a marvellous day planned for you, but safety always. We can advise there's to be no fire drill today or tomorrow. Apparently they happen on Friday. So please, folks, if you do hear the alarm, it's real. And you should make your way to the nearest exits. They're located at prominent exit points all around the room. And our muster point is the second car park from the barrier as you go out the front door. We do have the audio loop in place, and we got a thumbs up from an expert, so thank you, that means it's working, that's great. All the disabled bathrooms are clearly marked. We've ensured that we have appropriate permissions from all of our guests for our photos and filming. And if anyone doesn't want to be photographed, please speak to myself or another member of staff. I think that's all the announcements. Our session chairs for the 2022 conference will be Dr. Brittle, consultant paediatric endocrinologist from Birmingham Women and Children's Hospital, and she will share this duty today with Dr. Christine Burren, who's also a consultant paediatric endocrinologist. She works out of Bristol Children's Hospital. Both Dr. Burren and Dr. Saraf are members of our charity's medical and scientific advisory boards. We're delighted that they could both give us time and be with us this weekend. We have a coffee break at 10:30. We hope to stop at 12:15. And I would like to remind you to collect your little cherubs from the creche or bones area, if you've got any that you've got left in there, and take them on the way to lunch, which I believe will be served at the rotunda area of the corridor. I don't know if everyone knows what that is. It's the big round area where all the rooms are set off. You got it, good. So, we plan to incorporate some digital interactive sessions today, and it sounds all very scary, but we have a fantastic Stephen Ryan with us who's going to explain how that will work. So for now, I think that's all from me. I would just ask you please to sit back and relax and join with me now to welcome our session chair, who has a long association with the EBS. We're delighted she's agreed to help manage the sessions today. Her input will be invaluable. Please welcome Dr. Brenda Saraf.
Thank you, Patricia. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm delighted to assist the DBS today and help steer the talks and speakers, and if needed, to help with the debate that we're all delighted to have about everything about OI throughout the day today. Our first speaker for this morning is going to go over pain management in OI. But before that, I would like to explain a little bit more about digital interaction we want to utilize throughout the event today. To explain more about this and how you can take part, we are pleased to welcome friend and supporter of BBS, Stephen Ryan. He and the narration staff will be here with us throughout most of the talks today to gather your views and opinions. Patricia has used his expertise and services fairly recently to help with a very successful conference BBS held at Athlone in Ireland in February this year. She thought it might work well today in the family conference. Stephen and his team have travelled all the way from Ireland to join us at our event today. So please, let's welcome Stephen to tell us all a bit more about how this will work.
Thank you very much. So good morning everyone. So this is a bit of fun with your phones. If you have a mobile phone with you at present, You can take the QR code. I'm sure we're all very used to using QR codes over the last 3 years. Unfortunately, we use them for many different reasons. If you scan that, it will bring you to menti.com, so it's Mentimeter. And all I want you to do to begin with is press that little thumb button. And I can see straight away that there's 8 people in the room. I think we might have lost feet for a second. Oh, it's gone. Apologies. Give me 2 seconds. Windows always tries to update at the very moment that you don't want it to update. So apologies for that. So we have 21 people in the room. Everyone able to access that at the moment? If you can't, it's also on the actual registration book and on your table. There's a QR code on it. You can go there, or you can type in menti.com and enter this code. The easiest one is to do that. So we now have 30 people in the room. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, and on the top of your screen it's actually going to say, yes, next slide, you'll see. And I'm going to ask you a simple question. I want to find out where everybody is. So just let me know where you're from. You can actually put in your town, your country, whatever you want yourself, your street if you wish. So we're seeing people from Swansea, Leeds, Bristol, Oxford, the UK, Kerry, Brussels, West Sussex. Somebody came from Spain, Cumbria. So it looks like London is leading the way at the moment. So you can see that this will populate when everyone is there. So we now have 40 people in the room. Watford, Carlisle, the Netherlands, Chesterfield, and my hometown of Cork as well. So we're going to ask questions like this throughout the day. In the middle of some of the talks this morning, you will see the screen appear again. We'll ask polls. It'll be relevant to the various slides. If you just take out your phone again, the QR code will be on the screen, or just go from where you are already and you just see go to that slide. So while we're getting ready for our first speaker, if you want to populate this, tell us your number one reason, and we can come back to that later on in the day.
It was interesting to see that there are people from Spain, Netherlands, and I'm British, and Spain all. Thank you, Stephen. Next, we have Professor Brittle, Chairman of the Charities Scientific Advisory Board. He was appointed by the Royal National Operatic Hospital in 1999 as Director of the Metabolic Bone Disease Centre. He heads a team involved in the care of patients with a wide range of bone diseases. Following that talk, there will be a film on the same theme from physiotherapist Sophie Barlow. Then we will hear from Dr. Byrne about quality of life around new OI treatment. Also to remind you, your conference booklets outline new biographies of each of our speakers today. And so to keep the program rolling and to keep to time, I would like to request the speakers to approach the podium as per their time slot listed. This should hopefully help us to keep schedule. We will stop for coffee at 10:30 prompt and resume again at 11. When the session chair will be Dr. Christopher. So back to our program this morning. Please join me to welcome Professor Richard Key.
Thank you very much indeed, Verinder, and thank you to the BBS for allowing me to kickstart the meeting. And so I'm going to sort of talk to you in the next sort of 10-15 minutes, and then you'll hear afterwards from physiotherapist in my team, Sophie Barlow, who is in Mallorca, so I'm lucky her, but so she couldn't be here today. So I'm going to take you through sort of this, well, probably not the nicest start to a conference to be talking about pain, but I'd say bear with me. So essentially, if you think about the pain that we all experience at different times during our lives, there's obviously that very sort of sudden pain, that you may get when you have an injury, and many of you will remember that from if you've sort of broken a bone. Then you can have sort of more sort of chronic pain last, you've got that niggle that just keeps getting you every so often. And then we know that there are these intermittent pains that you might have a pain for a while, and then that can come and go. And again, that can be really challenging for you as a person, because it's there one day and it's there the not. And also, I know again from sometimes when you're dealing with sort of trying to sort of get support from sort of agencies with regards to things, they don't sort of get the concept that you might be that you can have problems at one point and then they can get a bit better and then it can come back, and trying to sort of manage that. So it's again it's just being aware that there are different types of pain that individuals will experience. We also know from a scientific point of view that again you can sort of characterise those sort of pains into sort of different groups. Again, sort of the acute and the chronic, and again, those other sorts of pains that you get, sort of these pains that are in the, sort of perhaps your stomach pains, and sort of pains that you get from organs in your body. Again, those have got a certain characteristic, and again, it's just being aware that, again, and we'll talk a little bit later about how you might manage those sorts of pains, but again, they're just those different sort of modalities of the concept of the pain. Again, you'll often have doctors asking you about how do you feel the pain, where's it coming from? And again, one thing I'm very used to hearing from individuals with osteogenesis imperfecta is sort of you talk about that bone pain, that sort of real pain that comes from your condition, and again, trying to sort of manage that. We also know that the types of pain and where it comes from are sort of they're similar across lots of different bone conditions that we see. And again, there's been a research study done, and you can sort of see on this mannequin that sort of they were looking at different conditions, sort of osteogenesis imperfecta, fibrous dysplasia, XLH, and again, you can sort of see from where, sort of on the colour coding, it may be a bit difficult for you to see in the room just from the distances, but again, sort of the types of body parts that are affected, the bones, the joints, the sort of the ligaments, other sorts of things. So it's sort of quite common, and again, you're going to hear later in the session after coffee about the concept of sort of networks of rare bone diseases. And again, it's really important for me as a doctor being aware that the types of pain and the sort of impact it has on individuals, there's unique things that are unique to OI, but then there's lots of things that are shared between other bone conditions. And again, that's quite good for trying to sort of consolidate services and sort of treatment strategies, etc. So again, I think it's just really instructive to be aware of the types of pain and where it may be causing problems. And again, for those who are in the audience, you may be you can perhaps relate to, I know my back's really bad, or I've got a problem here. And again, you're not alone. I think that's what's showing from this sort of research that's been done. So now we're going to quickly jump to a QR code question to keep you alert and alive. So basically, and you can answer this either for yourself, or if you're a parent, think about your child with OI. I want to sort of know how often you're experiencing pain. Is it often? Is it every day? Sort of several times a day, and things like that. And I think what you sort of vote. I think is there a queue of people who've got a QR code? Is that happening? Yeah, it's all happening live. So we're sort of seeing how much you're experiencing pain. So that's pretty. So again, it seems pretty much a lot of you. The vast majority are experiencing or just reporting pain every day. So that's pretty impressive. Well, that's actually for us as clinicians is really one. That's a group of people that have come here today. So again, almost over 50% of you are experiencing pain every day. So that's a really big sort of impact for you. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide of the talk. So what's interesting there is what you reported here is actually what scientists have almost, done the same sort of thing. This is some survey data, again, for over 400 adults with OI, and basically you can see that 80% plus of them are reporting pain, sort of current, pain frequently. And again, you can see the bulk of that graph on the left, almost all of it, a lot of it's almost every day. So again, you're mirroring what sort of people have done in sort of a much bigger survey across various people. So again, I think it's really important for us as the doctors to realise the impact that the pain is having for you in your sort of lives. And again, you'll hear a bit later from Sophie Barlow, who's our physiotherapist, and this was some work that was supported by BBS. But this was again looking at patients who come into our clinic. We run a multidisciplinary clinic for adults with osteogenesis imperfecta. And again, it's just looking at 50 sort of consecutive patients that came through our group, and again, looking at the types of where the pain was experienced, and again showing the sort of the impact of the pain and how often people were getting it. So again, really showing that not just in a survey like this, sort of talking to you guys sort of who maybe not coming to hospital, but again showing in a hospital setting a really high proportion of people having a sort of significant impact of pain. And again, there's been the impact study. Some of you may have sort of participated in this sort of online survey that was sort of, again, asking you about the impact of the disease on how it impacted for you. And again, what's interesting, might be a little bit small to see on the slides, but essentially, on the very far left, the most sort of frequently sort of reported problem with the condition was pain. Okay, so again, really important realising that for you and people with the condition, pain is really important. And actually, fractures sort of are probably halfway down that sort of graph. So again, a lot of times we focus perhaps clinically on fractures being important, but actually what we're realising is all these other things to the left of fractures are actually far more important: the pain, the fatigue. And actually that's really, really key. So again, just being aware of that, and from a big survey, almost 1,500 patients and people with OI, so really important. So in the clinic, what do we do? Well, obviously, when we're sort of taking, we'll take a history from you. We'll examine you, and then and I think there's always a problem with when an individual has a rare condition. Either, and I'm sure you'll relate to this, either your local doctor will blame everything on your condition. It's your condition. You've got to go to the specialist hospital, even if it's appendicitis. They will blame it on your condition. Or actually everyone is assuming that, and then you'll miss. You're just as likely to have, a sprained ankle, or you could be, you can get a headache for just general reasons. So just being aware of that thing. So it's really important that that we look out for things that are really serious. But again, taking that history, taking that clinical examination is really important. Some of you may have, again, sometimes we'll ask questions, we'll ask you to score your pain. Is it 0, is it 10? There are things like that. In some clinics that you go to, you may be asked to fill in some questionnaires. Again, those sorts of assessments perhaps are more frequently done in clinical trials. But again, those of you that perhaps participate in the Rudy study, you'll be asked sort of certain questions about pain and quality of life when those things come through. So again, it helps us get a flavour of how the impact of the condition on what you're doing, and again, hopefully then we can show that if you intervene, we make a difference. So very quickly, just running through the medicines that we're doing. We're going to hear from Sophie again a bit more about some of the other strategies, but what sort of medicines might you be thinking of using in managing pain? So again, a lot of the pain treatments are sort of based on this, what's called this World Health Organization pain ladder, where you start off really low with things like paracetamol and ibuprofen, and then you move up. Now, most of these strategies have been based on people with cancer, so they're not always appropriate for people with a more chronic condition who haven't got cancer. So again, just being aware of that. And there are sort of different drugs. So again, there are these paracetamols, and then you gradually move up. So then you move into sort of opioids, and again, we'll hear a little bit that those have their issues and problems. And then eventually there are sort of a mixture of other drugs that some of you may or may not have used. Non-steroidals, again, ibuprofen, naproxen, diclofenac, Voltarol, you've probably sort of heard of lots of those. They're good, but they do have some side effects. And again, don't dwell too much on the sort of sciencey thing. But again, one of the biggest problems we worry about with non-steroidals is tummy irritation, stomach bleeding. And again, some drugs have been designed to perhaps be a little bit safer. So there's things like celecoxib or alcoxia. Some of you may be on those. Those are thought to be slightly safer than other non-steroidals. One thing just to be aware of, again, particularly for people with osteogenesis imperfecta, there's a bit of concern that if you're using non-steroidals around the time of a fracture, they might sort of impair the healing up process. So again, we're quite keen to sort of try and avoid a lot of non-steroidals around the time of fractures. Again, that can be difficult if you're having recurrent fractures that are painful. But again, talking to the orthopaedic surgeons, they would prefer people not to always be on non-steroidals if possible. Opioids are good, but they have their problems, as I think it was Ant, not Deck, but you can get addicted to opioids. So again, be careful about them. They do have a lot of problems, and again, constipation perhaps is one of the other biggest sort of issues that you can get with people taking long-term opioid medicines. And again, I mean, the sciencey graph on the right was just showing that actually people that take quite strong, powerful, these sort of strong, powerful painkillers can sometimes be more at risk of breaking bones by fall, and that may be because it's making them a bit more dizzy or doolally, and then they're more likely to fall over, and then they can break their hips. So again, strong painkillers, if you're on them a long time, can cause particular problems. There are other drugs, again, that have been nice to sort of come up with sort of recommendations about what drugs you may or may not use. And again, some of you may be using these. Doesn't mean that they don't work, but again, sometimes you may get resistance from doctors to actually use particular medicines. A lot of you, obviously, quite a few people here probably have been on bisphosphonates. Again, that's just a sort of an alphabetical list of the bisphosphonates that are there. We know bisphosphonates work very well in children with osteogenesis imperfecta, obviously helping with their growth, reducing the fractures, and again helping with pain. Not so clear in the adults. I mean, scientifically we're not so sure about that, but again, anecdotally in clinic, a lot of people will say yes, the bisphosphonates do seem to help. There's only been one study, this was in osteoporosis, where they looked at the use of permidrinate after a vertebral fracture, and again suggested that there was a suggestion that it helped with pain after a spine fracture. But again, I'm sure people in the audience will have their own experiences of whether these drugs work or not. But again, it's not so clear whether bisphosphonates are that helpful in pain in adults. So say that I'm talking from an adult perspective. Cannabis, again, is not recommended, and again, I can't help you there in that respect. So, but essentially, it's a lot of we do get asked by people, for management of their chronic pain, and again, it's very much at the moment within the NHS we're not able to prescribe it. But again, I know sometimes there will be people who swear that it actually does help them. So I think the pain management is challenging for you. As we say, we know already, you've highlighted how important it is or how commonly it's affecting you. So we are limited, and again, one of the sort of surveys coming out of the States showed that actually, there was a study of about 861 patients. 40% of people, again, very similar to what we see here, were reporting chronic pain. And again, the drugs that they're using, and these are people with OI, non-steroidals and bisphosphonates were the top two. So, we know these medicines are being used, but, we know also they're probably not that effective all the time. And so there's a big gap, I think, in what we can do for people. And obviously that's hopefully where we're going to hear about other strategies which perhaps may be safer and more effective, and that's really important. So I'm just going to close. I'm going to thank my sort of colleagues, Dr. Bubbier and Martin Dudley, and Sophie Barlow, who's our physiotherapist, and also the BBS for supporting Sophie's work in our clinic. And thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to now hand over to Sophie, who's going to talk remotely about the work she's been doing. So thank you very much indeed.
Inviting me to speak about therapeutic pain management principles in adults with OI. I'm sorry I can't be there today, but I hope you're enjoying your morning so far. My name is Sophie Barlow. I'm a physiotherapist and I work at the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital in Istanbul. And as part of my role, I work within a multidisciplinary team alongside metabolic bone consultants and a clinical nurse specialist for adults with osteogenesis imperfecta. We know that musculoskeletal pain is a big issue for adults with OI. We conducted a study in 2022 that demonstrated 84% of adults with OI who attended our MDT clinic reported musculoskeletal pain. And of those, over half reported pain which has lasted for more than a year. On the diagram, you can see the widespread nature of pain reported, with the spinal area being the most prevalent. 45% of patients also reported moderate to severe problems with mobility, and over half of adults in the OI clinic scored higher on the anxiety element of the EQ5D measure. But we know that not all pain is related to fractures. It could be related to hypermobility, dislocations, soft tissue injuries, as well as altered biomechanics that come alongside osteogenesis imperfecta. But living alongside pain impacts our daily function in multiple areas of our life, and it can impact what we do for leisure, the relationships that we have with family and friends, our mobility, what we do or don't do for work, the quality of our sleep, as well as our mood and emotional well-being. So as part of the tertiary pain management service, we offer outpatient and residential pain management programs to enable people to live well alongside their pain. And from our study, over 50% of patients were referred into our therapy service in one form or another. We work closely as a multidisciplinary team, which include occupational therapists, physiotherapists, and psychologists. And as we know, all pain sufferers are different, so the focus is working together to achieve individuals' goals. So some of the key pain management strategies which we deliver through either teaching sessions or that are integrated into individual treatments aim to provide information that people can use to identify where perhaps change can occur within their daily lives, which helps to influence their symptoms in a more positive way. Pacing is a term a lot of people might be familiar with, and it allows people to identify whether they have more of a boom-bust pattern of behaviour, such as pushing through pain and then crashing because they've overdone an activity. Or conversely, the fear-avoidant behaviour, where we know something's going to impact our symptoms and increase our pain, and therefore we stop doing things that we once enjoyed doing. So pacing is very much about modifying how we go about doing those activities, such as taking more rest or using our assistive devices such as wheelchairs a bit more frequently perhaps. And people might find it useful to plan activities using activity diaries and potentially the traffic light system to understand the demands of our bodies, so red being a more highly demanding task and green activity being an opportunity to recharge, and amber is somewhere in the middle. And in order to do this, we need to understand what our baselines are and our tolerance to activities, therefore creating a more consistent activity level throughout the day. We talk about stress management, and we know in our modern lives we have many stressors. And when we're in pain, our fight or flight response may be heightened or more sensitive. And by learning how to tap into our relaxation response or our parasympathetic nervous system is important to reduce that stress hormone cortisol and instead release our feel-good, happy hormones such as endorphins. And when we do this, we can conserve energy, and we might notice that we have an increase in alertness or perceived ability to cope with our symptoms. Our occupational therapists look at sleep and enabling patients to understand what are sleep cycles and what can we do to influence them to improve the quality of our sleep. And it might be around positioning, using meditation before bed, having a better bedtime routine so our sleep cues improve. But we all know when we do sleep better, we do feel more refreshed and therefore more able to cope with the day ahead. We talk about flare-up management, and we define that as when your usual symptoms are more heightened and you are unable to carry out your usual daily activities. And flare-up plans enable us to understand what our triggers are, enables a clear process to follow when daily life is interrupted by pain. And this in turn can offer a sense of control, which can be really helpful at a particularly unpleasant point in our life. And some people make flare-up boxes with all the necessities that they need for a flare-up, so it's readily accessible for when they need it. And lastly, we understand that the importance of having a better understanding of what chronic pain actually is and how complex it is. And that might enable people to dig into their toolbox and to look at which strategies are helpful at what point, and therefore respond better along the way. So being a physiotherapist, exercise prescription is at the heart of what we do. And on programme or as an outpatient, our physiotherapists will offer an individualised assessment looking at a range of movements strength, how your muscles move within your function. And we'll also consider a person's confidence with movement and activity, and that can help us start at a level that's acceptable to that individual. Following the assessment, we will always work together to find ways of increasing physical activity that in person actually enjoys doing. As we know, not one size fits all when it comes to our lives, so we have to get creative with how we deliver this. We'll also consider what equipment is available to that individual and what they're able to access, as well as the socio-economic status. And therefore, coming up with a plan that they are able to engage with, rather than putting barriers up before we start. So we consider how often they can do the activity, work out what their baselines are, and therefore taking a graded approach to exercise. And we often ask patients to reflect on how movements feel, and if they can influence this with perhaps breathing or using a different muscle group, for example. And we want to promote behaviour change, and in order to do that, we want to encourage more long-term physical habits. So we integrate the concepts of pacing and try and gain an understanding of what motivates that individual to continue in the longer term. We aim to empower patients to take control of their exercise routines by providing regressions or progressions, so things that make things easier if perhaps you're in a flare-up, and things that can make things a bit harder if you're feeling good and you feel you want to improve. And they can use that along the way interchangeably, depending on how they're feeling on any given day. So I've mentioned using the breath to help with movement, and this is a skill that we introduce within our sessions. So as well as implementing different relaxation techniques, we recognise the importance of encouraging some mindful movement, so paying attention to how your body is feeling in a given moment. And this allows people to connect with their body and what it's telling them, and provides them a tool to influence your physical condition. So for example, if you feel that you're very tense and you're very guarded, it allows this makes your muscles want to work harder, and therefore potentially increasing your symptoms. So using your breath to release and notice that muscle tension can help with reducing some of those secondary layers of sensations and symptoms that you might feel. And during an inpatient programme, patients will be offered psychology assessments, and if required, they will receive treatment based on cognitive behavioural therapy, as well as attending group sessions about communication and assertiveness. So how do you communicate your needs on any given day? And if further treatment is required, they can signpost to appropriate services. So in conclusion, musculoskeletal pain is very prevalent with adults with OI. We know that therapeutic pain management strategies are skills which help support patients to live alongside their pain. And our therapy programs aim to empower patients to make lifestyle changes in the long term in order to support them with their symptoms. So I'd like to thank my team that deliver this day in, day out, the Metabolic Bone team who I work very closely with on a weekly basis, and also the Brittle Bone Society for sponsoring our studies and our ongoing support. And that's the reference. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your meeting. I hope to see you all next year.
And thank you, Patricia, for the invitation to contribute to your conference. And it's nice to be back face to face. And in a way, just flag what I'm seeing on the screen here is different from there. Yes, thank you. It does seamlessly flow from the other two that we've just spoken about. So we're quite keen to have questions at the end. Now, quality of life, it might be something that you not necessarily pause to reflect on, and that was the for the purpose of spending a little bit of time on a fragment about what's an enormous topic, really. So, the quality of life, I mean, what is it? Why am I talking about it today? Which part do we mean? Which part am I going to talk about? Is it something that we can measure? So just with those questions in mind, and you will all have your thoughts of quality of life, so we're just going to bring up another of the interactive word cloud questions, I think, online, about what does good quality of life look like to you? And I'm sure this word cloud, as you progress on, is going to populate with such a broad range of words. And I think that will populate further. And I've got a few more word clouds as we go in. That's great, there's some overlap of words there. So then moving on, what is quality? There's a whole range of things. It's lovely this word cloud, we could spend all morning looking at that. So we'll capture that. We better press on, I guess. So what is quality? Can we go back to the slides? So perhaps, quality is chocolate, perhaps you might be thinking about it. Yes, that's your definition of quality. It's certainly the name. The reason I put it up there is the image on the right there. It means different things to different people. You might be a toffee penny person, or perhaps you're a coconut eclair, or one of the elusive purple ones. Different for different people. And there are so many components, and one of the really important components, if we think quality of life like whole life, and this is an area best preserved for Samantha, which is a Corbone session this morning, and I'm really looking forward to her talk this afternoon, because if we're talking about quality of life, the whole life, living your best life, your authentic self, she's captured that. I'm halfway through reading it, and it's magical. So we've got some more of that coming this afternoon, and I look forward to that. So, quality of life, what I'm more going to cover is from the aspect of, okay, so how does understanding it really, how can it help us improve the care that we provide for individuals with OI? And to do that, then we've got the tricky questions, is it something that we can measure? So you perhaps move from thinking, how do I define OI? How do I define quality of life? Why do I suddenly want to measure it? And that really is more and more important, because quality care, we all think we know what that means, but now when we have to justify that spending, we need the evidence more than just various opinion. And I think that comes particularly in the current economic climate, and as we move on to new treatments which are innovative, and by their very nature, they've therefore spent a long time in the research trials gaining evidence, and all of that has cost money, which then to reimburse it is an expensive new treatment, so then we need evidence in order to introduce that. There's a lot of new treatments coming in, so I'm not going to outline each one, but if we just think this document outlines that in 2023 there are more than 14 companies looking at over 18 drugs in the pipeline for in the area of OI. So it's an exciting area, and we need to think carefully about how that's going to then add into and improve what we already provide. So the current care, if we think about multidisciplinary care for OI. Now, as a paediatrician, I am thinking about this from the NDT that we provide for children and young people. It's across a range of areas like medical interventions, by physical therapy, I'm encompassing physiotherapy and occupational therapy, pain management, psychological support, surgical interventions. So we are thinking they are all effective. Now, in reality, they have different emphases for different individuals at different times of their life, but as a whole, providing them, it provides effective care. Now, I think we have our second, perhaps not word cloud this time, behalf of their children as well. Okay, that's really nicely distributed. So, in the room collectively, we're all feeling these are all important components. Now, if I move on and then break that down a little bit and say, okay, these current treatments, how well do they work? And that's a different question. And which components are they improving? So, as Richard also alluded to in his talk, bisphosphonates, there are things we can measure that's improving, but the felt experience of how it improves in different patients is really hard to actually capture. And surgery with rodding, different people have a different lived experience of that. And what are those effects on quality of life? And that's the current treatment. So that brings us back to, okay, quality of life, this elusive entity in which one of the reasons why it's difficult to have a pure definition is it is very individual, it's subjective, it's down to personal, different personal factors, values, it's complex. We could expand that word cloud. And on this word cloud here, you'll see some of the words coming out that you were putting in at the start. So it's a really important entity, but by the very nature of all those different components, it's hard to distill down. So, however, the World Health Organization have distilled it down to what's a broadly encompassing, but at the same stage, slightly dry component of quality of life is an individual's perception of their position in life, but it's in the context of culture and a value system in which it lives in relation to your goals, expectations, standards, concerns. So it encompasses everything, but how that sort of, what does that mean to this lad here, quality of life? Quite hard to then be drilled down. When on top of that we have a condition that may impact, we have another challenge, and that's why what's referred to as the ICF model, the International Classification of Functioning, has been used. Again, we have this wonderful lad in the middle about how the OI, how does it compromise, or in what ways it's enhanced, about activity, participation, be it in school, work, life, bodily functions, environment, personal factors. There's a lot to encompass. So it's a big task about what outcomes can you usefully measure, which is why we have this weighty and comprehensive document which is recently published, and it's the outcome of several years' work from a couple of dozen people you can see up here, expert health professionals, patient organisations internationally, and they looked at all of the outcome measures, what you can measure looking at outcomes. And they had quite a big task on their hands, because you can see at the top there was over 400 domains they had to look at. So they suddenly filtered it down to about a tenth of that, and then further iterations left with about 24 domains. And what we've then got is about 24 measures in each of adults and children. So a way of looking at those outcome measures is perhaps best summarised in this compass here. On the left, where we see outcomes important to measure are major events such as surgery or fracture, but going on to aspects on your body which we can measure with growth, x-rays, bone mineral density. But as we move around the compass there, activity load, the quality of life factors there. So there's loads of measures. The ones down on the left there, they weren't ones mentioned by Richard because I picked out the ones that are relevant for children. And so that's getting us the feeling about how we could measure outcomes in the condition. So I just want to bring it back to spanning out to quality of whole life. And that's where I would say we've got the quality of life down the left hand, but it's on the right hand, the health-related quality. How does the condition of OI, how do OI treatments impact? And for that we need what's called a health-related quality of life. And at this point you're probably thinking, what's this next thing about? But that's something that is nicely defined as impacting on well-being. It is the impacts of your self-perceived well-being that are related to or affected by the presence of disease, a condition, or treatment. And there are current tools to measure health-related qual. They don't capture everything. And just mentioning two of them, here's the EQ5D that Richard also mentioned, as did Sophie Barlow. There's a youth version as well. It very briefly looks at 5 domains and does so by asking across each of those 5 whether you have no problems, some problems, or a lot of problems. So it does give you insight. Again, it doesn't capture everything. More recently, there is the work from Claire Hill in Sheffield developing an OI-specific questionnaire which looks at a broader range of aspects, which gives you an idea about the status at that time. So it provides some valuable information. It's slightly different from measuring back to how well the care works. So we have one tool. This is not a very fancy prom dress, could be, but actually it's your patient-reported experience measure or your patient-reported outcome measure. That's a tool that we developed in Bristol about 10 years ago. It is used collaboratively across the 4 complex children's OI centres in England, and it looks at the experience of what service the experience of the service provided, whether it's the information, input around school and home, hospital visits, transition. So it tells us something, but in a way not enough, because in this context now, with these new treatments coming along, of which not all 18 will suddenly descend upon us, but just to go through what's entailed in this. So funding these new treatments, which as we know is a long, lengthy process of research studies, in order to prove that the treatment works and in order to then obtain a license. And in many countries, once that license is obtained, then that means it can be prescribed. These treatments are likely to be expensive, and then there's another layer of looking at can we fund that new treatment, which is where the NHS has the National Institute for Health and Excellence, and they're saying, well, what difference does it really make? And then they come up with some complex health state utility values and preference weighted and all very weighty health economics topics for a Saturday morning. But don't worry, I'm not a health economist, so I'm not going to venture larger than that. I'm just saying these are important things that suddenly crop up and will be useful if we've thought about them earlier. The reasoning behind that is that what's the overall benefit of a new treatment? And it really does go beyond the DEXA, what's the bone mineral density, fractures. They're important components, but what impacts it have on pain and mobility. And what on this slide here I've got as an even-sized circle of really your broader health outcomes and what I call sort of life participation across a range of aspects. So how do we suddenly capture that in the evidence in parallel when we're developing a new treatment to say this is useful or this less so? So that's why health-related quality of life is very important, and that's why on this slide I've enlarged that box down the bottom, because for 2 reasons. At the end of the day, that's the more meaningful component, not just about whether the treatment has a beneficial improvement on your lived experience with your condition. And I've covered a lot lot of, the area we said before, these umpteen outcome measures, and they tell us some things, but not everything. Perhaps we can incorporate them earlier. But I think in order to design the meaningful questions, that's where we need the input of the children and young people. And I would think this needs to be potentially focus groups or other ways of garnering direct lived experience input. And that's not just from the children and young people themselves. I've put adults there in two components. One as carers of those with OI, your observed views, and those of adults with lived experience of OI from your childhood about what you can see with the longer range prism could be different with new treatments. And I think that's where we need to add in that meaningful data. I mean, it's not a quick outline, okay, we do X, Y, Z, but I'm putting this up here as a pause for reflection about how we best do that, because the ultimate aim really then is to get that quality of life, health and well-being less impacted by condition. We also want to make sure we don't introduce treatments that have their own impacts, that's going to be a negative component as well. Because fundamentally we've got lots of measures of things, but it's, if you like, back to that true quality of life. So in terms of talking about quality of life, that's a massive topic. I may have left you with lots of queries or questions, but equally, perhaps in the centre there, that icon there, perhaps some ideas. So they're the things that would be great to feed into the question session. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine, and welcome Professor Keane back on stage to answer any questions that the audience might have for us.
So if you want to log back in to Menti, so if you logged yourself up, if you go into your browser, it's probably going to pop up. So Safari or Google, whatever you're using on your phone. And we're going to start with questions for Professor Keane, and then we'll continue on afterwards. So if you can start popping questions in here, it'll appear on the screen, and we'll be able to use them in the panel. And then when we move on to the next slide, automatically it will say go to the next slide on your phone.
If you would prefer just asking the question, we can pass the mic around as well. We can get the mic.
Who was it? Sorry?
Yeah, it's coming up on the screen. Say go to slide.
I think someone's asking if they can get the slides afterwards.
Any new drugs for kids below
So the slides, we can make them available as a PDF, sort of, that'd be fine for that, there's nothing sort of sensitive. Okay, so that's great about that. So Calvin, yeah, so bisphosphonates taken to life over 50 years ago, and they were basically included as water softeners. Okay, so that's why. So etipenate, which is those people that in the audience, some people etipenate was digital PMO, which was old-fashioned bisphosphonate, and etipenate was basically included in Calvin to stop your washing machine spurring up. Okay, and then the clever scientists sort of realised that the way it works, obviously, it's bound to calcium. So someone thought, well, then if it binds to calcium, it could bind to bone. and then obviously they tweak them to then sort of inhibit, so it binds the bone, and it stops the bone degrading, and that's how bisphosphonates came. So that's basically why I put Calgon up there as a sort of thing to show that that's how bisphosphonates started over 50 years ago.
Just following on from that, the question about any new drugs with OI for children. So we've extrapolated from adults and used bisphosphonates for many years, and that's our current mainstay. But we know we're not using it as a water softener. But nevertheless, the way it's working is not actually helping generate new bone, it's preventing bone breakdown. So it's not quite the best fit. We've been exploring other components. Some of you may be aware there was a trial for several years about denosumab, which was very exciting about how it was working, but ultimately had some unexpected impacts, which meant that it was not treating to use and could lead to less bone. So I think that's a really important reminder about why we need to go carefully with these new treatments. But even with that one, we thought that's not really the best fit. So another of those, I'm not going to go through those more than 18 that are in the pipeline, but one currently, setrusumab, is likely, the way it would work is it'll enhance bone development, so that's quite exciting. But we're early days in, there's currently research enrolling children in those, I think in 2 centres in England, which will entail a monthly intravenous infusion. So you can see there you've got the, you're going to need to wait to see is the overall improvement outweighing having a monthly infusion. And at present people will have different opinions, but I think we need that larger body of evidence. And there's others in the pipeline. So I hope that's enough of a question for the present. And I'll hand back, because in the meantime, we've got some other questions come up.
I'll just quickly jump in with the mechanical loading question. So again, a lot of times we talk about, we know that bones respond to sort of load bearing, so sort of gravity and sort of impacting against the ground, so to speak. So and so, the analogy of that also would be, if you went up into space, your bones will get weaker because of lack of gravity. So that's what people talk about. Now again, that can be more challenging, obviously, in people in a wheelchair, how you can sort of get some sort of stimulus into your bones in that respect. There was a study looking at some sort of vibration platform in osteogenesis that was done out of Birmingham, and that didn't really show such a positive effect. But again, I know that it's something that there is work with some of the physio teams looking at how we can perhaps increase the muscle activity, which will then have an impact on people's bones. And they work both in, I think in the UK, we're looking at things in Europe as well. So there are ways to try and sort of get those stimulus to the bones to help. So again, we're extrapolating over what we know about sort of osteoporosis and then trying to sort of move it into the OI sort of bone. Scoliosis. I mean, yes, scoliosis, again, that's difficult because obviously there are structural changes in the shape of the spine, and then obviously you can then get development of secondary sort of arthritic changes. Again, I mean, people talk about massage, and that can help, but again, sometimes it's more temporary improvements in discomfort. Again, as with adults with scoliosis, sometimes you can identify areas where, because of the sort of curvature, there are sort of areas that get more irritated and inflamed. Sometimes you can have them injected, but again, it doesn't cure the underlying problem, it just basically gives you some temporary relief. But that could be for quite some time. So there are techniques that people can use, and sometimes there are more fancy painkilling injections that people can do that perhaps more permanently anaesthetise the painful areas. So the things to talk about with either a back specialist or a pain specialist, working alongside the people you'll see.
And there's one more question about fractures in adults and whether bisphosphonates help mend a bone or not.
So bisphosphonates, as we said, we talked about there's something perhaps that bisphosphonates will help with the pain. The way the bisphosphonates work, they won't actually probably help the bone heal more quickly. I suppose what's probably more relevant is they probably won't, at least in the adults, slow the bone sort of healing as such. So they're not going to have a positive impact, but they probably don't have a negative. Although sometimes we still do temporarily if people are on an IV bisphosphonate, we might pause it temporarily, but they're definitely not going to help. And that's why some of the other treatments that are in development, because they work in perhaps a more bone forming capacity, might actually have a more positive impact on the bone healing process.
Maybe one for Christine as effective long-term use of bisphosphonates in children.
Oh yes, so while you put up your questions for me about the talk, I've just given some of the talk questions on Richard's one about, well, there was one complaint about long-term effects, which was perhaps particularly, but the other question about how long in children. So I think this brings us back to, at present, as you said at the start, there's less evidence in adulthood once the bone has finished its growing, whereas whilst the skeleton is growing is an opportune time that they will contribute enhancement. And if we think particularly during adolescence, which is a major time of growth of the spine, that's one of the aspects that contributes us to often think it's useful, if on them, to then continue through to completion of growth. It does vary between patients, but that's underlying what's going into that. Because one of the evidence we do have is that as a whole, it will have beneficial effects on lessening the degree of scoliosis. So I think it's relevant for building a better spine for later.
Yeah. So we often will think about stopping bisphosphonates in people as they move into adulthood. Mainly as from what Christine said, we know that the bisphosphonates do help with the growth and reducing the fracture frequency. We're not so clear about in adults, and unless someone's getting an awful lot of benefit from a sort of just more that sort of fatigue improvement or less general body pain, which again is really difficult to quantify. But unless they're experiencing that, we will often think about stopping, because there are some, at least again, in the osteoporosis community, there are some issues about long-term treatment. So we sort of take a gap in treatment. We don't say taking a break in treatment in the bone clinic. It's not a good word to use. But we'll say a gap or a pause, and then one can always reinitiate. But I think we are often dealing with thinking about stopping, because at the end you've attained your sort of peak bone density, you're finishing growing. So there's often that stopping in sort of early 20s for a lot of patients, but not all.
I think the other advantage in children is vertebral remodeling. If they have vertebral fractures, then bisphosphonates help with vertebral remodeling, which isn't the case in adults. So I think we've got a couple of questions for Christine now.
And actually, really difficult questions that you put up there. Has research shown that quality of life has improved for patients with OI over the years? Well, I guess my initial answer would be no, because it's been very hard to define. And I think it's actually only in recent years that we look to consider what's a better marker, and when these treatments were earlier introduced, it was largely about what happens with, does the bone mineral density improve, which is something that you can capture really well, but it tells you less in terms of the long run. But if I think about my answer to the previous question, when I said, well, bisphosphonates are important for adolescent, it builds a better spine, reduces scoliosis, with the thought process that is going to pay dividends in the decades later. But that is us making a logical deduction. There's no one study out there that looked decades ago and compared to now. Loads of things have popped up here. Quality of life and human you think you'd like to see. Is there a roving microphone?
I'm currently doing my master's dissertation in looking at the regression of human rights since COVID for those living with OI. So I was wondering if there was any research currently into like quality of life and human rights for those with OI. Just, so that there's a bit less research that I need to.
I think the research that you're doing is really valuable.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll take the 14 years on bisphosphonates. I mean, again, obviously difficult to comment about the individual person, and this probably is not the forum to do that per se, but I mean, obviously, that might, as we said, the data for alendronate in OI is perhaps limited. I think depending on the age of the person, there are some other drugs that are available for adults, that one might be able to consider. It might be that maybe switching to intravenous, maybe denosumab in the adult population might be a possibility. There is a drug called teriparatide, which is a bone-forming drug, which is not licensed for children, so you can't use it in children. It's undergoing evaluation in the Topaz trial, headed by Stuart Ralston in Edinburgh and supported by BBS. But again, in some cases, there may be that it would be clinically appropriate to consider that in someone. So it would depend on the age of the person. I'm happy to talk to them sort of outside of the sort of more public forum here, if that would be helpful. Yeah, I mean, I think the physiotherapists, I'm not sure if there's any published studies, but a physiotherapist will look at all, sort of modalities to help. Now, again, hydrotherapy, a lot of hydrotherapy services shut during COVID, and so obviously there was a lot of access to those were a problem. But again, a lot, if you can get access through your physio department to hydrotherapy, that's actually really quite good. It's a way to get your confidence up, to start using some muscles. And some local facilities, local pools will again have sessions that you can go to. The wards might not be quite as warm. But again, it's trying to, but equally at the end of the day, a lot of the benefits from hydrotherapy are sort of more short-lived because you're not all mermaids, you're not spending all your time in water, so you need to get onto dry land at some point. So it's actually trying to find that strategy to move from water-based therapy to land-based. But again, I think the other problem sometimes with physio is that, and we've had some patients already, you only get a short block for a lot of cases, so sometimes we know your conditions can be a little more long-lasting, so trying to do that. And sometimes if you're not actually going to a very good physiotherapist, I have patients say, what was the point of what I got given was access to a YouTube video or a pamphlet, and sometimes you need someone looking a bit more holistically for you, so I think there's a lot of things that are needed. And again, I think the paediatric services, the physio input there is probably better, and we need to improve it in the adults, which is what we're trying to do. So this is, but again, hydro things work, but it's part of a package.
Any advice from women feeling that perimenopause? I guess it's an OI setting.
Yeah, I mean, so again, I think HRT it has almost had a resurgence back into being considered as good for bone health. And again, I don't think we would manage someone with OI any differently. So I think again, if those symptoms, discuss it with your GP, and it does have a positive impact on reducing bone loss, so it would almost be stopping the additional sort of problem with the skeleton. In fact, you've got OI and then you're going to sort of lose a bit of bone as part of menopause. So I think HRT definitely has an impact, would something we would be happy to let people consider.
Yes, I'll pick up on the one at the on the left-hand column. From looking at the research, is there any one thing you think most important to improve quality of life? In fact, I think the answer there lies not so much in how we're looking at quality of life, but in my reflections in both the talk that Richard gave and thinking about Sophie Barlow's talk that she gave while sitting on the beach in Mallorca. We can pick up the theme that pain is a very prevalent component, and I thought lots of the practical strategies that Sophie gave were going beyond the physiotherapy exercises, thinking about the mindful components to build into your day, the role of effectively reducing your parasympathetic system to put your body in a better state to then cope with whatever is going on and lessen some of those symptoms. I thought she had some really constructive, practical suggestions, and I would propose that if that therefore reduces that pain, that is going to be a big improvement in quality of life. That would be one of the big wins as a practical thing.
Question is, rolling surgery after tibial fractures for kids with Brooks syndrome and why is it helpful? Is it having multiple fractures, either of any of the long bones, especially lower limbs? Then yes, we have noticed that prodding helps as it provides more stability. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to stop fracturing, but the recovery that we have from fractures is sooner and they are mobile quicker than if they're not rodded. It says, is there any evidence of better bone health for those living in hotter, more sunnier climates? I think they're asking us whether we can prescribe a holiday to Spain.
Maybe better quality of life, maybe. There's a question about radio frequency inflation. Yeah, I mean, that's why I said sort of talking to, if you've got chronic pain from a mechanical, sort of biomechanical issue related to a back or an area, then again, a discussion between your OI experts and the sort of a pain clinic and those sorts of things. Those are the things, those areas that might help. So yeah, I'd be happy to sort of think about it. And again, you probably suggested to me, I think, that having input more from pain clinics as well as all the other things that Sophie talks and giving us that sort of multi-faceted, multi-disciplinary approach to managing the pain, both stuff that you can do, stuff that we can help with.
Thank you for all the questions. I think we've got a coffee break now. We'll break for coffee and reconvene at 11 o'clock for the next session. Thank you.
But if we've got any chance of getting to the next bit, which is lunch, I guess we're going to get going. And first of all, thank you to Brenda for chairing this morning's session. So now it's I think it's still morning. It's the second part of the talks of today's conference. And we're going to hear from a number of speakers in this session. First of all, Will Wilson will cover the results from an important recent survey, and then a presentation from Dr. Kasim Javid about a new collaborative network that BBS is supporting around care pathways, and his own project, the Rudy study, which may be familiar to many of you. And then our final morning slot about top tips of living from OI with John Hines and Teams Ganesh Murthy. And then we'll get to the final discussion section of the morning. So I guess that's a lot to get through between now and lunch. So
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for that kind introduction. And thank you very much to the BBS for inviting us to be here and to present. So, as said, my name is Wilson. I work for Moreau and Biopharma. I'm here with several of my colleagues who trusted me to do this presentation. And so I'm going to give a short overview of the results of the impact survey. So I believe this follows on really nicely from the presentations of Professor Keane this morning and also from Professor Barron. And the thing that we were looking at is there's a really exciting moment that was alluded to this morning. We've now got a multiplicity of companies developing potential new therapies specifically for OI. And that means that there may be the first of many different new treatments, hopefully for children and adults, that are on the horizon. And we at Moreau are obviously part of that. And we've been talking with the payers and people like NICE already to start understanding what they're going to need to be seeing in order to make the decisions that Professor Barron referred to, not just having a therapy approved, but really who's going to pay for it and who's actually going to have access to it. So you will see that it mentions the UK perspective. I just want to give a small note here. We're not discounting Ireland. We did get survey responses from Ireland, and I know that the BBS represents the UK and Ireland. But we wanted to make sure that we weren't having a data set that was too small that it might compromise anonymity. So we're erring on the side of caution, and today I would only present the breakdown of the UK data because we've got 185 respondents, which protects the anonymity of everybody. The responses from Ireland were 15, which is still very valuable, but it could be so that when we break them down, one or other person could become identifiable, so we want to check that first. So I'm being cautious this morning, and a huge thank you to everyone from Ireland who did contribute. So I'm sure you all know the impact survey, and that's because the BBS has done a great job of publicising it. It was fielded between June and September 2021. It got huge response levels, so more than 2,200 individual responses of people impacted by OI, which from a rare disease is simply off the scale for this level of research. Normally you're happy if you get 400. So 2,200 is just absolutely fabulous. So the first thing is to say thank you to everybody who responded. Today I want to give a snapshot of the UK results. It's your data, it's not our data, it's the data of all the UK respondents. I want to keep to time. I want to give a few takeaways that we've noticed from the data for the UK, quickly touch on our plans, and then we'll hopefully have time for questions afterwards. So, and the slides will be available afterwards as well, which is good because some of them are quite small. So, I suppose people might be thinking, why would we need yet another survey? I've heard regularly that the OI community feels that they're potentially the most surveyed community in the entire world. And the reason is that as going back to this really the concept of there being a shift on the horizon, there may well be, we hope, lots of new therapies coming on board. And I say plural. So obviously we hope ours will be successful, but we also hope that we'll be the first of many. And we realise that we're going to need evidence to support not only the approval process, so by organisations like MHRA or the EMA, but also to help the decision makers who will decide on whether therapy actually becomes available. And in order to do this, we need to set a baseline of what OI really is. A lot of people in MHRA, EMA, NICE, they sort of know OI, they know the BBS of course, but there's quite a lot of preconceptions or non-conceptions. And we really need to set a baseline so that we're operating on a factual basis, and so are they, and it is scientifically evidenced. So what we did first of all is to set a scoping review. So we're not going to redo questions that we already had the answers to or that we find in the existing literature. And in order to do that, we put together a steering committee which had company representatives, clinician representatives, and representation from the OI community. And this meant that we could look at the missing questions through the lenses of the 3 different communities. So not only did we not want to re-ask, we wanted to make sure that we could ask the questions that were the most important ones, but also the ones that were most appropriate to being answered by a survey. Some questions are important, but they can be best answered by other means, so via medical records that we could interrogate anonymously, or from other ways to find that data. So what we came up with through these 3 lenses, what was missing and what would be important, was the set of questions. I'm looking at the same thing you're looking at now. So we had 3 buckets. The first is about the respondent. So how old, what type of OI, what kind of treatments you might already be on. And then also to focus on the clinical impact, patient journey, humanistic, so what kind of impact that OI is having on the respondent's life. And then also, and that's very important for this idea of future potential therapies, what is the economic impact? What does OI mean for the person with OI, for their families, for the BBS and supportive organisations, and also for the healthcare services? Because obviously, if we're going to be asking to have new therapies funded, people are going to want to know what kind of trade-offs they're having, and I think that that was also part of what was alluded to this morning. So we're looking at these 3 areas, and that's what it focused on. So saying that the largest ever data set on the experience of people with OI, but also the largest contributions, the 3rd largest contribution came from the UK and Ireland. So 200 responses combined, which is absolutely thanks to everyone who participated and thanks to the BBS who supported the rollout and the awareness raising and explaining the importance of this. So why it's important is not only to have a huge aggregated data set that really adds scientific weight to these answers, but there's also enough with 200 responses for us to be able to really give UK-specific data to UK decision makers. And that's incredibly important. So that can be used not only to go to NICE or other bodies about new therapies, but it can also support decision making around care. For example, what are the adult needs, where we're talking with decision makers in government to really get a new adult pathway, new care package pathways for adults. This is all evidence that can be taken from this survey and can be carved out specifically to the UK, because we all know local decision makers want to have their own local data. So who responded? It won't come as any surprise probably that the most people that responded in the UK were adults with OI. So 144 of the 185 UK respondents came from the adults. So that's again a very big data set. It gives us a lot of evidence to work from. But there are a couple of very interesting things that go from having such a large data set. It probably won't come as any surprise that the female respondents, so 74% of respondents of the adults were females, and that's pretty usual for a lot of these surveys, as we understand. But because of the high numbers in the survey, the fact that 26% of the respondents were males, the actual numbers give us a really solid data set to work with. And so we can look and see, are there specific challenges, opportunities that are specific to male respondents, males with OI, and that gives us some really important data points that we can use to share with the decision makers. And the size of the data set allows this to be meaningful. And also, so if we're looking then at the adolescents, and you say, well, 6, and obviously we're not going to dig into that because that will not be anonymous. So were there 6 adolescents who responded, and by the way, thank you if you're in the room. No, it's not because there are only 6 of you and because we can't look at that on its own that that wasn't worth doing. What it will enable us to do is say, are there specific things that we need to be looking at? And we could then commission specific research into that, to dig deeper into that. So the indications we've got, even when the numbers are small, gives us pointers so we may not know the answer today, but we know what we have to investigate further. So if the needs arise, we can do something in the future, and that already in and of itself is a huge contribution. So when we start to look then into what kinds of OI and how people rank the severity of their OI in those respondents in the UK, we got, as you can see, which probably isn't a surprise, that the majority of respondents were saying had moderate OI. Again, probably that's not a huge surprise. This is the data of the OI community in the UK. And from a type perspective, most were reporting as having type 1 or type 4. Again, it's probably not a surprise when we look at the epidemiology. However, from the payer perspective, from the healthcare decision makers' perspective, a very important thing came out. There's a key area of confusion with the decision makers when it comes to this idea of type and future therapies. And that's okay, because they're not experts in OI. You're the experts in OI. But we've got a job ahead of us to do if we want to have a solid conversation with them and enable them to make the decisions that are actually going to help the community. Because the risk is they're viewing the Sillens classification, so the type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as a severity scale. And it was never intended to be that. So there's an immediate way when they look at it, say, okay, type 1 is mild, type 3 is obviously less mild, is more severe, and then type 4 must be, so it's all a bit mixed up in the minds. And so one does not equal the other is one of the key findings that we've got. And now we've got the data to prove that, evidence that to the decision makers here in the UK, but also in the other European countries. And that's incredibly important, because one does not equal the other, and we need to break down that preconception, and we've got some more evidence to do that. For me, I think, though, when I look at this, and when I look at these results, the most important thing is actually how a person with OI feels, and how OI actually impacts their real day-to-day life. And it's not about being put in a box and saying you're a 1, or a 2, or a 3, or a 4. It's actually about how OI impacts people, impacts them in their work, in their social life, in their quality of life, in their life. And so I think that's something we need to address effectively for all these things, but particularly now when we look at new therapies. And this gives us a really solid evidence base from which to do that. And that's thanks to the feedback we got from responding to this survey. And when we talk about impact, here's already a great takeaway. Amongst the UK adults, OI impacts their career choices, their job type, and even what leisure activities. 75% of the adults in the UK who responded said that their career options were limited, or they felt their career options were limited or put in a framework by having OI. But as you can see from this, it goes beyond the job. It goes, as I said, into career choices, the job, work hours, and leisure. It's all impacted from adults with OI, and they've told us that, and it goes beyond time. So again, the impact of OI in real life. The other thing that became incredibly clear was that OI has financial impacts too, particularly when we have a cost of living crisis and a crunch. It's clear that most elements that have taken care of OI are funded either by the NHS, and that's in the green bar, or in self-funding. I pay for it myself, and that's in the blue bar. So the NHS is paying for things like walking aids, hearing aids, breathing aids, and that's great. But a lot of very important things are being clearly funded by people themselves. So there's in the blue bar, you've got dental, home vehicle modifications, which I think are incredibly important, but also wheelchairs. And I think this also speaks to why the work of the BBS is so incredibly important, because there are lots of financial impacts, and being able to capture this, evidence it, and show it to decision makers is incredibly important. As I said, for the future therapies, but also to help support the work of the BBS, who we know are doing an incredible amount in this area. I know Patricia's not in the room, but I want to say that it's very important that we remember that. So when we look here, maybe these are not a surprise, but I did see a couple of things here that are very important, and I know this is tiny. So here we have the children, no we don't, we have the adults, we'll start with the adults. So these are the pale blue lines. So what we talked about this morning is probably not a huge surprise. Pain is, an absolutely huge percent, almost 100%, 94% of adults respondents reported having pain. The adults were saying 85% of them suffering from fatigue, those two bottom lines. That's not a huge surprise. But I think what is a surprise, probably, is when we look at the fact that a lot of them are having fractures. And 37% of our adults were reporting having fractures. So when we heard back from the healthcare authorities, kids fracture, adults have pain. That's clearly not the case. You still have 37% of adults that are reporting having fractures. So that was already something that we need to correct that perception. The children, the dark blue lines, as you can see, you've got fractures again, 53% of children have fractures. A lot have hypermobility. But what was also extremely interesting is that children are also reporting pain. So 60% of children are suffering pain and experiencing pain. So this idea that fractures are for kids, pain is for adults, is not as clear-cut as that. And we need to be able to put the facts before the decision makers. And this body of evidence gives us this opportunity to do so and correct that misapprehension. And following on from this idea that, say that adults don't fracture, which is what we've, heard quite a bit. Irrespective of the type, and again, that goes back to, not 1 is mild, 2, 3, and 4. Almost a third of adults with OI reported having had a fracture in the last year. That's not a non-fracturing population. And this had no direct correlation between the severity or the type that was being reported, because almost a quarter of the adults who said they had fractured in the last 12 months had classified themselves as having mild OI. So again, and over half of them had said that it was moderate OI. So I think another thing to come back, saying moderate OI or mild OI doesn't really mean anything on its own. It's the impact that the situation is, the impact in reality in day-to-day life and in the events and the experience. And I think we need to be able to capture this effectively. And this again gives us another key point to show that the preconceptions are not what people believe them to be. Now, when we look at the fracture sites, I think that that's true. We can see that the fracture sites may well be different. And as you can see from this, rib fractures are most common amongst people with adults with OI, whereas it was the children that were reporting more leg fractures in their past 12 months fracture experience. So adults were reporting up to 7 arm, leg, vertebrae or rib fractures in the past 12 months. That's a lot. That's not a non-fracturing population. And children were reporting up to 6 fractures, with a median of 2 fractures in the past 12 months. Again, that's a significant burden, a significant impact. But beyond that, in the other fracturing sites, fingers and toes were very routinely reported. And this is something that we've also had an interesting discussion with decision makers. Because even if one can say that a finger or toe fracture is medically less concerning than a vertebral fracture or a femur fracture, the impact is measurable on the person who's having a finger and toe fracture. So these are not negligible fractures. These are not things just to be swept aside. And I think when we're all looking at the phones and the polling that we've been doing, it will be a lot more difficult to do it if you were having your fingers fractured. So I just think this idea of it may be less medically concerning than a fracture in a vertebrae or a rib or a leg or an arm, but they're still not negligible. There's still an impact, and they still, in my view, need to be evidenced and shown and raised awareness of. And just coming to the end here, the last few thoughts that we've had. The adults who fracture, they translate not just into the pain, the trauma, the event of the fracture itself, but they translate into a significant impact on the quality of life. And from here we could see that there's a big reported difference in the quality of life between those who fracture, who say they fractured, and those who don't. And when we broke that down further, when we looked at the severe to moderate reported group, who reported that they were fracturing, the difference between those who say that they have problems in quality of life and those that say that they don't really, in the fracturing population, in the severe to moderate population, double the amount of people who were fracturing said, yes, I'm having problems with quality of life, versus those who say, I'm not fracturing and I actually feel okay. So that's the double of the amount. So that's a significant impact of fractures on quality of life more broadly. So it's not just work, it's leisure, it's social life and what people do. So this is, for me, a really strong indication that fractures go beyond not just the medical concern, but also they go further in and they put their tentacles in along with the pain and the fatigue across everybody's aspects of their life. So what can we conclude from this? I can conclude, myself personally, I believe I can conclude that the impact survey was needed. We're not starting from scratch in any way, shape or form. We were standing and are standing on the shoulders of giants and the work that's gone before. I believe that the impact survey will be hugely valuable to provide evidence for, I'm sure you all know, but we need to capture, quantify evidence to people who are going to take decisions in the future about your healthcare and in fact all of our healthcare. So this evidence needs to be done, it needs to be compelling, scientifically driven and convincing. The other thing I could conclude is that it's only been possible thanks to the BBS and thanks to everyone who contributed by answering the survey. So again, a huge thank you to everyone who's done that. For the next step, so what are we going to do with all of this? The first thing we need to do is publish and get the aggregated results out, and we've done that. We've got the baseline survey results, the methodology, and we're working on the next manuscript. In fact, we've just got the draft in, and the deadline for us to start pushing that forward is actually today. The second thing we need to do is, once we've got it published and out there, and things that we can point to and are really peer-reviewed, we need to then do a deep dive and go into the country work with Patricia and the BBS and all of you together to start working with the country decision makers to make the country data, country by country, visible and aware so that they really understand each decision-making body in the country knows. So when we're really looking to the future, our objective is to improve, obviously, the access to potential future therapies, whatever they might be, but also to support the work that's been going on for years and led by the BBS to convince decision makers to have better adult care pathways, to continue to support and fund the kids' pathways, and also to support the understanding for all of the equipment and modifications to make sure that people can have as independent and fulfilling and full lives with OI as possible. So this has been a huge amount of work. I hope it's going to have a huge value in the future. It's only been possible thanks to everybody who contributed. So a huge thank you again to everyone who did. And thank you for inviting me to speak and to share the UK results. I'm looking forward to continuing to build together. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and we now welcome to the stage Associate Professor Kassim Javid. I think his polling questions are going well and all the way, so it's going to be good to look at those in detail. And we're awaiting your slides.
Thank you, Christine. Hello. Hello everyone, my name is Kassim Javid. I'm an anthropologist at Oxford. I'm really delighted with Patricia and the team for giving me the opportunity to share with you a sort of acronym bonanza of different terms. So here are my disclosures. So I'm going to go through where we are with the care pathways for adults, the Rare Disease Collaborative Networks, or RDCNs, and then where we've got up to with the RUDI study. So I just wanted to step back. I'm the chair of the Medical Advisory Board for the Brittle Bone Society. It's a really important part of the BBS because it sort of forms the interface between you all and the BBS charity in terms of clinical advice, scientific advice. And I just want to give a shout out to all the members of the BBS. You see, it's a huge team. We've got recently changed, Angela's changed over to Sally. We do have a wealth of experience with experts in the BBS who can advise you if you've got any clinical concerns, worries about your healthcare. So do use us to help you get answers to your questions. So what we want to do, she took me out for coffee and said, Cassim, we need to be the new chair. What are you going to do? And I said, what we need to do is focus on the adults for a bit, and we need to improve the quality of the care. And we've sort of done this by chance through two pathways that are linking in beautifully. One is the care pathway, and the other is this network we've set up. So for the care pathway, what we want to do is to make sure that wherever you are in the NHS, you know what the NHS should deliver for you. So it's not a guess for whether a hospital should or should not do this. This is what every hospital or every healthcare team, from GPs to your local hospital, an expert centre, should be able to provide. And importantly, I think Richard mentioned this, we'll also tell you what's not your OI and can just be managed locally. Because if it's not in the care pathway, it probably isn't related to your OI, and you can just go with confidence to your GP and say, forget about my OI, just treat me as you would anyone else. So there are a number of steps to doing this. I'm not going to run through this, but it wasn't just a simple thing of sitting down and scribbling on the back of an envelope. We went through a structured approach for delivering this care pathway. And critically, we had adults who live with OI to help us deliver this. So this was a care pathway that was co-developed between the medical teams and also adults living with severe OI in type 3. And they were very important in making sure we covered all the aspects of care. And I'm really grateful to the BBS because they worked tirelessly with very short timelines. We wanted it to be ready for this family meeting, and we've achieved it. So if you go online now, you can have access to everything I'm going to talk about. And I'll show you how you can do that at the end. But this is, just to let you know, this is just a draft stage. We think we've got there. Now we're going to wait a few months, let you all have a look at it and comment on it. And when you're happy with it, then we'll publish it as the formal guideline on the website. So we've, on the guideline, divided up the pathway into different sections. First of all, we've told you to contribute to the guideline. So there's a huge list of names and specialties for who's in the guideline. And then we talked a bit about OI. And for this first part of the guideline development, we focused on people living with severe OI, including type 3. Because we thought that was a nice place to start, and there is already a plan for the guideline for people with mild or moderate OI. And the first step is the diagnosis, and for adult clinicians, it's really quite easy for us. Usually when adults come with type 3 OI, we already know they have type 3 OI. So that was quite easy, but we went through a few principles that we should make sure have been done, including the role of genetic testing. And then we went through quite a large list of what is a good assessment of an adult with OI. Now, all of this has to be done by the specialist centre, some of it can be done by your GP, but this is all the aspects of your OI that should be looked at some point if you have severe OI. And you can just read off the list. And this is where we really benefited from having all of those different experts help us build up the pathway. And they all contributed their own little sections. And then what we did is, how do you do the examination? When someone comes up with severe OI, including type 3, what are the steps we have to do when you meet them face to face and examine them? Because it may be you're examined by someone who hasn't got great expertise, and there's only way we can share that with them. What are the laboratory tests that should be done, and then what should be done in terms of monitoring other aspects of their disease. Then we went through the different treatments, and we really took a person-centered approach. So you wanted to start, well, what do you want to get out of your life? What are your treatment goals? What's holding you back? And then went through the different stages from lifestyle. We've had a lot of talk about pain already. That's in there. Everything which you talked about. What do anaesthetists need to know? Are they happy with severe OI or the anesthetics? And then all the way down to fractures, scoliosis, hearing, mobility, and mental well-being. Then we went into how often you have to repeat these tests, and then we've got a section we call special circumstances. This is around women's health, contraception and pregnancy, cancer screening, general health tests, and also a section on red flags. So these are things that you need to be really aware of, because it could be related to your type 3 OI and you need to seek urgent attention. Now that's quite like a look-up book. It's not to expect you to read it or give you a test on it. But if you've got a problem, you can go to the checklist, look it up and say, actually this is what my doctor or my therapist will be reading about it, so you'll be on the same page as them. What we also want to do is build a checklist for people living with OI. So before you go to your clinic appointment, these are things you should be thinking about, or could be thinking about, in terms of preparing and making the most of that 20 or 30 minutes you have with your team. It's got what you need to know about the appointment. Do you need to bring anything to the appointment? Sort of a quick checklist of things you need to do before you get to the appointment. Information you can think about, and things you can think about that might have changed since your last appointment that you might not have thought were important for you, but may be important for the doctor or the medical team. A section for other things you want to discuss, and what do you want to get out of the appointment? What's your plan after the appointment? And this is what we're calling a patient checklist. It's a huge list, and it's meant to be huge, because you maybe only check off a few sections that you feel are particularly relevant for you. As I've said, both of these documents are now on the BBS website. They're in the consultation phase, so if you go to the website and then go on to campaigns and consultations for how you can help, you'll see the care pathways for adults with type 3 OI. If you press on that button, you'll get a link to the detailed care recommendations and a checklist. But what we really want you to do is click on the button in the middle where you can give feedback on what you think about the pathway. And when we think enough people have had a look at it, you've given us feedback, we'll take those comments, we'll make the checklist and the pathway even better, and then publish it as a sort of how-to guide for adults with severe OI, including type 3, for the whole of the NHS. So once we've done the pathway, the next thing is how do we spread it? And this is a real concern for us, because there are only a few bone experts, but there's lots of people, there's lots of hospitals without any bone expertise. So what the NHS has already set up in England, also across the other nations, is something called a Rare Disease Collaborative Network, where you really bring the knowledge to the patient rather than asking the patient to move around the country. And there are sort of 6 key goals they want the collaborative to do around awareness, coordination of care, but also research and a support network. So last year, I worked with Patricia, the team at BBS, and a lot of clinical experts, and we put together an application to do this for all rare bone diseases. We didn't want just one for type 3 OI or type 1 OI, we wanted it for all rare diseases, which was a bit tricky, but we all worked together and we were successful in getting our Rare Disease Collaborative Network for adult rare bone diseases. So there's now a network in place. It's only starting, we'll launch later this year, but that will provide a net that will cover anyone living in the NHS. At the moment, we only have sites in England, Wales and Scotland. That's the aim. So the aim is actually to cover the whole country with something we call MDTs, or multidisciplinary team meetings. If you've got a problem and your local healthcare team can't answer it, the next step is go to the MDT, where experts from other centres can help them give advice on the best care. And we're also going to develop the care pathways. You've just heard the one for OI. We're also going to do for X-linked hypophosphatemia, tuber-induced osteomalacia, and fibrodysplasia. And we had a really good response. 22 centres put in their support, and we're now going through the formal process of actually getting that letter of support into a formal document so they can go on the website. So the patients have been really important. The BBS have been incredibly supportive. We Patricia and her team have actually helped us run the administration for this process, and patients are throughout the programme. They help us in the steering committee, they're helping us with the pathways. We're going to create some sort of indicators. When you go to an expert centre or a specialist centre, we'll ask the specialist centre to report some information so we can just make sure we're covering all parts of the pathway, and we'll also increase awareness. It's quite a big programme of work, so we've got to agree the terms of reference, we've got to set up the multidisciplinary team meetings, then set up the resources, and then set up the regional meetings. And we've got a number of priorities, as you can see there. We've already made great progress, and I'm going to show something that's in draft. This is the map. It's better than this on the website, but I didn't trust going live on the website. But basically, you can go on this map, and these are all the hub centres at the moment that are agreed to be part of the network. And then you can go to your GP or your local hospital saying, look, this isn't working out, I'm not quite sure what's going on, can that be discussed at an MDT? And this is a local site that will be holding it. So it's a very powerful way for you then to access expertise across the country, irrespective of where you live. Our launch event is in November, where we'll really kick off the pathway. So I've talked about the care pathways and how we're going to use the networks to deliver them. A little bit of research. It's 7 years now we've been running Rudy. Some of you are in Rudy and really voted for that. It's sort of like our sort of go-to place for just reporting data about people with living with rare diseases. It's a very small team. I set it up with Joe and Alison and Daniel and keep it running. We've got a really great patient forum. And for those of you who don't know about Rudy, you basically log on and you can enter data for research and you get benefits from it. People like joining Rudy because it's secure. You can see all your health data you want. Anything you put into the database will actually be made available for you. And people have used those questionnaires for their PIP benefits. They use them for going to see consultants. It's because it's all easily accessible. And because it's an online platform, if we do one survey, then do another survey, we can link the results of that. So a really easy way to get in touch, get registered, you fill in online forms, and then you select how much you want to do on the platform, and you can change your mind afterwards. And then you get asked to fill in a number of forms that measure what it's like to live with rare diseases. We talked about quality of life with Christine, and then health and quality of life. We also cover pain, sleep, tiredness, and employment. This is what it looks like. You have these forms, so we've got a fracture map, you've got all the fractures you want. I always get the question, Cassie, you're crazy, I've broken my arm 20 times, I don't know what it was. It's very easy. You can just put in the date range, between what years you broke, you want to put it in, and then you just say how many times you broke your arm. You put 5, 10. But the real benefit and power is you get all the data back. So the data is on your private website, and it's always there for you. All of your questionnaires, all of your fractures are there for you, and you can even download it as a PDF. And people have used that as a sort of go-to healthcare and quality of life metric. How does it help people living with OI? So we've recently done some work with the team in Manchester, looking at quality of life. I think you've seen these mentioned before. But what we're able to do is look at the quality of life and its impact on, say, pain, mobility, self-care, anxiety, depression, and compare it to adults who don't have OI. And there we can clearly see where the differences are. And really getting this message across that OI is not just a disease of children, there's huge impacts in older people. And we're really lucky, both for the website, they funded a study, and we're doing a little bit of work on productivity. So we've got some basic work, we've got about 20 adults who finished this questionnaire. It's a horribly named questionnaire, evaluation of lost productivity. Basically it means what's the impact of OI on the ability to earn money for the taxpayer? That's what it's about, and that's really important because the Treasury paid for the healthcare service. And that's a very important link we often forget. So not only do we have to make the healthcare argument, we have to make the Treasury argument. And if we go around and say that this is a really important illness and it's taking away productivity from the economy, that helps get healthcare prioritisation for funding of services. So if you are in Rudy, go to the vault, put the valuation of lost productivity, fill it in. We're going to do another data cut later this year, and then we'll publish the paper. If you're not in Rudy, there's the website, register and join. That's what I was going to really talk about. I have to, of course, thank everyone. I'm just a small cog. There are loads of patient groups, scientists, clinicians and academics who really helped us get this way. And I hope now you know more about care pathways, you understand the RDCN, the rare disease collaborative networks. I think this will be a game changer. Working with the BBS, we often say, where do I go to? I've got my child's transitioning, I don't know where my nearest centre is. That problem will now go. Because it doesn't matter where they go, we've got coverage of nearly every hospital within a network. And if they're not covered with a network, they'll be covered within a national network. So if you live in part of the UK where there's nothing in bone health, don't worry, there'll be a national ET where your hospital can join and get the advice they need. And then just finishing off on the really stuff. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I think we're going to have questions at the end, and we'll wait for Dom and Tim to kindly come to the stage.
Pass it down. What do you say?
I think you sit here with Will, because then after Dom and Tim's session, I mean, you'll all sit there. You could sit down there now if you wish.
I'll sit over there and all back.
I don't really like to. And I think you'll find the microphone was there. Would you like
It works.
It's alright, I might up.
your mic down?
We did karaoke.
Got a few hours yet on the karaoke.
Oh, yeah. Okay, just about since so I like Dom. We're here today because actually we're in a trustee meeting and we were just talking about tips in life within an independent life. And we were chatting through how a lot of tips come from others in the community, a lot of tips you just pick up here and there on the journey to try and be as independent as possible. And ultimately we thought we would try and package that up in a tiny little session for you today. So we'll probably whiz through it at quite a pace, but of course, if you've got any questions whatsoever, please come and chat to us afterwards as well.
Brilliant. I think our first slide just really gives a bit more of an introduction and background of who we are and why we're here today. So, I was wondering why things aren't moving on. Thanks. So, as Dom said, I'm Timmers. I'm one of the trustees alongside Dom of the Bone Society, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Just a bit of background on my hobbies and interests outside of my trusteeship. I'm an avid cook, a hobbyist crafter, so I make homemade cards for my friends, family, and loved ones. It's something I got into during COVID and absolutely love, and it's something I really adore. And also, for my sins, a civil servant working for an unnamed department, which we won't get into today, but maybe after this session we can. And a tech enthusiast as well. One of the things that I'm eager to do in life is to explore all that independent living has to offer and all the different life experiences that one can experience despite the limitations that might be brought on by my disability and health condition.
And I'm Dom. I'm a professional marketeer by trade, a very keen traveller, terrible cook, and sun worshipper along my journey as well. So yeah, I similarly very much value my independence and do the things, tips, tricks and everything in between that I can to be as independent as possible in my life.
There are 5 areas that we hope to cover in terms of our top tips. These are the 5 areas that we came up with, but we know that there's much more we can talk about, but for the brevity of time, we thought we'd focus on top 5 areas. 1 being independent living, 2nd being travel, 3rd being health and well-being, 4th being employment, and we want to sort of encompass digital technologies and digital devices as an underpinning theme across everything that we do. We know that everyone isn't the most digitally minded, but for those who are and are able to make use of it, we want to sort of provide some of those tips as well. So I'll hand over to Dom, who will take us through the top tips for travel.
Seamless, thank you. So if you could whiz on to the next slide. So we've got a sneak peek on the screen now. In 2021, the BBS conducted the Independent Living Survey. Am I right, Patricia? Yeah. And so that was conducted and kind of got responses from the Brittle community, as well as some others outside, I think, a little bit. But in terms of the responses, you'll see in a sneak peek of some of those results today. What you can see on the screen now, 33% of people said that they can travel to all the places that they want, which obviously isn't a huge number. Similarly, 41% said that they didn't feel confident to travel abroad. So ultimately there's a lot of work to do there when it comes to confidence in and around travel and society. So the first tip, and again these might come quite randomly in some ways I suppose, because there's so much we could cover. I know there's a lot of anxiety with it when it comes to travelling abroad. For me, I had a terrible experience flying to Zurich one time. That's not a top tip. Don't have a terrible experience. But afterwards, I was speaking to someone who worked at Virgin Atlantic actually, and she said, just humanise your wheelchair. Put a sign on your wheelchair and put a picture of your face on it. However narcissistic that might seem, put a picture of your face on your wheelchair and say, warning, this is really expensive, really heavy, do not break it. And touch wood, I'll probably live to regret that now. Since then, I've never had a massive issue with my wheelchair when flying. And I really do think it has an impact because suddenly it's not just another piece of luggage, it's a mobility aid. Someone realises, oh, actually, I need to think twice about this before I lift it. So it has caused some people to raise their eyebrows when they see the sign and big red writing saying warning, but it seems to have done the job. So Sophie's over there to help with the arts and crafts of how to make all those signs if you need that as well. And then in the UK, there are lots of different apps that are now helpful when getting from A to B. To be honest, until quite recently, I didn't use passenger assistance because I just was able to turn up and go to a station that was local to me, and I thought, well, I don't want to book 24 hours in advance, so and I can't book 24 hours in advance for where I'm going, so I just never really used it. I've since moved to a station where actually using this app I can travel, but without using it I can't. So actually it's amazing to use it and actually have the independence with it. Similarly, the timescales have gone down to, well, it says 2 hours, but often it's under 2 hours and you'll still get assistance. So maybe not for the way back of wherever you're going, but always for the way there. It can be quite a helpful tool to use, and it's designed well and seems to work pretty well for most people.
Thanks, Dom. So this is my turn to chip in with some tips about health and well-being, and it's one of those topics that, for me at least, over the last few years, has been a bit difficult to prioritise health and well-being, and it's something that often gets pulled to the wayside for me with other things that are going on, like employment, with education, and various other things. So sometimes health and well-being, sometimes for me, has gone to the wayside. So this year, at the beginning of 2023, I created something called a life goals tree, which I used to sort of prioritise bits of areas which I wanted to really work on and develop, and health and well-being was one of them. One of the things that we learned from our community as part of the survey was that 55% of the people that filled out the survey said that they're able to spend time doing things that they enjoy or value, and 74% of the community told us that they don't find it difficult to form relationships, which is really reassuring and positive to hear, but we know that we'd like to see that number be 100% if possible. So we just wanted to talk about a few of the ways that I find it helpful to sort of engage with both the health and well-being side of things, but also on the social interaction side of things. On the health side of things, this year I found the importance and value of going to a personal trainer. We heard this morning Sophie and Richard talking about the importance of exercise and doing the right exercise for you, and I've worked with Sophie and the team at the Royal National Orthopaedic for years, and it's been really helpful to help me get back to benchmarks and back to my normal state of affairs after a fracture or after a long period of ill health. But I found that I wanted to do more, wanted to push myself, and wanted to discover what my body was capable of. And we know that not everyone will benefit from going to the gym, but for me, I wanted to try it out, but I never found the right motivations or the right support. I was lucky enough to find Carmen, who's the lady pictured on the left of your screen there, She's a personal trainer that works very local to me. She's someone who's worked with a lot of patients who are going through rehabilitation, people who have osteoporosis, and finding her has made a massive difference. I've been working with her for the best part of the last 4 months, and I've seen my confidence and enthusiasm for going to the gym grow. I've seen progress in my own strength, in my mobility. I've done things that I've never previously thought was possible with my body. And also she's a stretch therapist, and I've never really been taught how to stretch my muscles out properly, and I found that not only doing that at the gym helps me do better and be more focused when I'm at the gym, but also helps me manage my fatigue and pain a lot more confidently when I'm at home as well. So this is one of the ways that I found outside hydrotherapy has helped me gain confidence, helped me be a bit more social, meet new people, people that I would never have met otherwise. And I think, you know, there are websites that you can go to and research personal trainers if that's something that you want to explore, to find people that are experienced in working with people with health conditions, people with long-term disabilities and bone conditions, if you want something to sort of work with that as well. So the top tip on that round is, you know, there are a number of adapted and inclusive opportunities around us. So sometimes it takes a bit of creativity, but sometimes you're taking the time to explore the wealth of digital and in-person activities. Oh, that's not what it is. There are a number of adapted inclusive opportunities available for those who are wanting to exercise and participate in sport. And Dom and I wanted to highlight Everybody Moves, which is a website that you can go on, which lists all the activities that are going on in your local area that are maybe community orientated, so local walks or local yoga sessions, seated yoga, and various other things. So if you are interested in exploring what's available in your local area, I definitely would recommend checking out Everybody Moves as something that you can use. And the next thing is around well-being. There's lots of different ways that you can look after your well-being, and for those around you as well. For me, going to the gym has really helped. It's given me an extra space outside of work and outside of my other hobbies to get outside of myself, but we know that that may not be the thing that's right for you, so we wanted to, you know, encourage everyone to explore what's around you, to be creative and explore the wealth of digital and in-person activities you can do together or by yourself. Another thing that I found really helpful is online therapy. So I have had psychodynamic therapy, and I've been doing that in person when I started, but now I've been doing it digitally, and that's been really, really helpful. Another thing that I've really started engaging with is Toastmasters, which is a club which you can go to, which can help develop your public speaking skills, and it's a great opportunity to meet like-minded people and get an opportunity to sort of see and get to know different things about yourself that you never thought possible. So those are some of the ways that you could explore things and get yourself in a different scenario, either by yourself or with other people. Moving on to independent living with Dom.
Independent living. Do you want to go into the next one? Yeah. So 42% of you were homeowners, and 61% of you have carried out house adaptations already. I think that second statistic obviously just shows for a lot of people that adaptations are necessary and are required for a lot of the community. So in terms of how to do that, I'm sure many of you have come across DFGs, the Disabled Facilities Grants. They can be a tricky beast depending on where you live, and of course, you know, it goes without saying that quite often you find yourself having to lead the conversation in terms of what you need, and so any research you can do about what your needs are obviously helps that conversation along, because quite often you know more than the other person in the room sometimes. I've also got those other companies at the bottom, and they're all basically house adaptation companies that specialise in what you say is non-utility looking adaptations. Historically, that has been a very different price bracket from what would be included in DFGs, but very recently there was a landmark case where someone actually lobbied and got, I can't remember which one it was, but they basically, I think it was a freedom kitchen, they got a freedom kitchen for their needs because every single one of their use cases was assessed independently as I think it's £30,000 as a DFG, but every single sort of use case that they had as an individual was deemed as another DFG. And so that in its total meant that something like Freedom Kitchen became very much possible for them and exactly the right thing for them. I was told that that means that it might be the floodgates might open for other people being able to utilise these services for DFGs moving forward. So I'm not kind of saying that that's definitely the case, but it's just something to be mindful of, that these things exist and they might be able to be possible moving forward. I'm sure many of you, all of you probably have smartphones, of course, but more and more things in the home are becoming smart. And similarly, when you're thinking about what in the home could be made to be more sort of independent within for you as an individual, there's so many things now that now can be connected via Bluetooth, via wireless technology to enable you to be that little bit more independent. I just got a coffee machine that I can turn on from my phone, and it's changed my life. But similarly, there's blinds, there's showers, there's absolutely everything. Of course, everyone's already sick of talking to Alexa or Google, but they can be really, really fascinating tools that, if you're using them in the right way, can unlock a lot of independence for people. So similarly, we put this in there more as an encouragement to people to share what they're doing in their homes, because no doubt we can learn from each other around those things.
We move on now to mobility and equipment. One of the things that we all recognise is that our mobility is key to our independence, and it's something that we all really, really value. And there's different ways that we all like to mobilise, and all different ways that we can utilise the technologies that are out there. With new technologies that are developing, coming out every day, we are encouraging those who need mobility equipment that maybe might not be funded by the NHS, or might not be something that might fit into what the NHS might offer. There are ways of funding those additional mobility aids. I know many in this room have reached out to the BBS to get support in funding additional wheelchairs or additional equipment, and it's something that we want to let our members, families know that we, as a charity, are there to support you if there are bits of equipment that you feel that would really benefit yourself or your family's sort of independence in terms of your child or someone that you look after. So definitely come to us as BBS for our expertise and various funding opportunities. We're very lucky to have got support from the Mobility Fund to provide some extra funding, which has definitely made it easier for us and quicker for us to provide support to those who need it within the community. So definitely reach out to us if that is something that that you are considering. And the second thing is, if you're unsure of what is out there, and I know we've touched on a few top tips of things that we found helpful, but there's so much more that we can use, and so much more advice that we can share amongst each other. So we're encouraging everyone to lean on the community and the wealth and breadth of experience that we in this room and those outside of this room have to offer. So if there's anything that you're unsure about, anything that you might want to know, definitely reach out to members within the community. Reach out to me, myself and Dom. Our contact details are at the end of the slides. Reach out to the BBS. They can signpost you to various opportunities. And one thing that we found useful is Access Life, which is a place that offers reviews. So if there's particular chairs that you're looking at, or particular mobility aids that you might want to get reviews on, there's honest reviews which are made and put up there by people who use them. So if you want to get a few sense of how effective it can be for you, it's a great place to look. But they also offer refurbished equipment and various other things. So if you're looking for a place to get sort of a discounted deal on some of the things that we've either talked about here, or things that you're looking at or considering, definitely check them out as a way of seeing what's available.
And finally, employment. So 49% are employment, and 8% receive support from Access to Work, which for us sort of felt like a really low number because of the amount of support, the various support that's available on Access to Work. So no surprises is the first top tip. So for those in full-time work, so Access to Work, the government scheme, essentially is there to provide equal independence to the world of work for individuals. So anything that you would need as an individual to essentially undertake the role that you're in to the best of your ability and to put you on an equal footing, that support, obviously there are certain restrictions, and some can be frustrating, but it can be a real game changer in terms of the support you can receive, both financially from a travel perspective, but also just in terms of the things in the workplace as well. I would say again, get some support and advice from other people around what they've done, because again, you might know more as an individual on into that assessment than the people that you're speaking to and the first assessment, because of course your needs are more specific than a lot of people that they speak to. So yeah, just definitely come armed, but then also make sure that you utilise that as much as possible that you can. And finally,
so where can you get more information? So we've referenced the Independent Living Survey from 2021. Where can you find that? Where can you find more information about some of the things we talked about? So on the Brittle Society website, under resources, you can find a crowdsourced top tips guide, so that you'll hear there are far more top tips than we have the time to cover in this session. So we spent a lot of time, Corinne and the team did fantastic work over COVID to try and crowdsource the things that people found really useful in their home, in their work life, in their day-to-day life that they find useful. So you can find fact sheets on independent living, on how to get around in mobility. You can find more information about the grants available on the resources side of our website, as well as the access to the survey results that we've been referencing throughout the talk today. And one final thought we'd like to leave you with before we go into the Q&A panel, and we really invite you to participate in the Mentimeter. What things have had the greatest impact on you and your independence in the recent past? We'd love to hear and crowdsource a bit more from you, as well as questions that you might have from and I as we go into the panel. So thank you so much for listening, and our contact details are on the slide, so if you do want to reach out to either one of us, then please do. Thank you very much for listening.
thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And can I invite actually all the speakers of this session to move up and take your elected spaces, names. See, and and we've got a number of. Is this microphone working? Yes, and I think in front of me on the screen here, we're hopefully about to see the Mentimeter questions as well. We're all commenting, we're needing to so I know you're all probably getting impatient for lunch. We did start the session quite late, but it's really important to have some questions. We'll have your inputs because you've all given fantastic talks. We've had input from several people there. Because there's several aspects you might want to pick up on those questions.
Yeah, so
Should we pick up your microphone?
Can you hear me? Yeah, so Northern Ireland, yes, we work with them automatically because it's within the NHS. Republic of Ireland, BBS has got a great relationship already. We now know already to speak to them. So there's no reason why the principles can't work in Ireland. By the way, the Rare Disease Company Network is totally unfunded, goodwill of the clinicians, which is always a nice thing, but we're hoping that as it builds value, individual hospitals will recognise how important it is to support those clinicians, and individual hospitals may start picking up some of the costs. Richard's grimacing, but I will never get that. But in other hospitals, actually, their chief executives do value this. There's a prestige element to it as well.
Question about location of Rudy.
Location of Rudy?
Whether you have to go to Cambridge?
Cambridge, no. Rudy's online. Rudy's online. So if you live in the United Kingdom, you can do it. It's all online. And actually, anyone can access the research data. We haven't had any patient representatives, but if a patient representative group's got a great idea, they can log on, ask a question, we'll link you up with a researcher, and we'll get the research done. We've had researchers from all over the world, even Americans are using it.
And the question about the pathway, eyes were included. I saw ophthalmology down there, so there was such a comprehensive list included there.
Sorry, so
The middle right one, if you can read.
right.
When we talk about the pathway, did it also include the eyes?
Yes, it did. So we've got a section on eyes, a retinal detachment, and forwards in glaucoma. It's all in there. It's interesting when you do these pathways, you realise actually the evidence is really bad. There's not much data out there, but we've got eyes covered.
And in the middle top column, a question about how care pathways is going to work. Is it a buzzword that doctors or professionals will
pathways are embedded within lots of practice. Rare diseases less so, there's less evidence. So usually if you've got a heart attack, there's like a pathway you follow, you have a stroke. We're now developing it for these areas because we're not looking for evidence, it's just stealing what the experts do in other centres and spreading it around. But yeah, the term care pathway is good. They won't know about this care pathway, you'll be our champions. Probably never heard of BBS, or your GP probably won't be aware. But it will have the right stamps on it, and the right authority, and they'll recognise the centres as contributing to it. So it is rubber stamp.
So therefore you should take it along with you as a helpful document to guide you through. John, and yes, there's bottom left and bottom right, duplicate questions really, tips for finding accessible rental homes and tips for adapting rental accommodation and finding.
The second question is easier than the first because the second is beg for forgiveness, not permission. So I think if you actually went to the rules of what you can do to a rented home, often it would be, you can't even put a nail in a wall. But if you are prepared to sort of undo some of what you're doing or say, well, this is actually fundamentally necessary, then I would sort of plough on as much as you feel able to, but please, I'm not liable, I promise. It's not legal advice, it's not legal advice. But the reality is, of course, it's difficult. And I think to the first question, in my experience, we really struggled when we were looking to move and we were looking to rent at one point. And going from Hertfordshire, where I was, into London, the advice from Hertfordshire County Council, well, they just said, well, why don't you just not move to London? Why don't you just get a job on a high street and that'll be a lot easier? And that was generally the head of disability at Hertfordshire County Council, and that was their advice to me. And unfortunately, that's the reality of what we're dealing with a lot, because not that many people do it when they've got kind of specialist needs. And it's easier not to. There's not really the fundamental advice in place to help you do so. This isn't helpful advice, but what we just went for is that just go for it and then work it out as you're doing it. It's very scary, it doesn't have all the answers, but ultimately, if you want to do something badly enough and you cause enough of a storm while you do it, and hopefully people will help you along the way.
Yeah, I'd agree with Dom. I think for me, finding accessible housing was definitely difficult, especially in the rental market. What I did was when I was looking, I had a list of my bare criteria. So I wanted my home to be on the ground floor, flat rather, on the ground floor because that was important to me, and I needed space to be able to get around. Bathroom and bedroom, those are my key priorities. Everything else, I was like, I'll figure that out once I get there. And there was a lot of input that I needed to get from occupational therapy, so I had a couple of occupational therapists come in and look at ways that we could make the space more inclusive to me. So table risers to make the tables in the dining room a bit taller, risers that I could use in the bath, so we didn't have a walk-in shower, but there was a powered chair that I could put into the bath so I could get in and out, and exploring different ways in which I could make the space more accessible. I think one of the things that I did realise is, for getting the kind of units that I wanted, the cost was prohibitively expensive and it was difficult, but you can get reductions in your council tax if you need an extra room because you have a carer or you need support. So there are ways that you can work around some of those things, but it is difficult. And in terms of other things that I found helpful, and what I'm finding is when you're looking to find somewhere to buy, I think it's a bit more easier. I found that units, it's far less costly, and if you're working with developers in the early stage, it's a lot of forward planning involved, but if you can work with a developer in early stage of building, then it can help in terms of getting the kind of property units that you need in the longer term. But it is a lot more work, it's a lot more planning, but it's some of the ways that we can overcome some of the challenges that society sadly put our way.
And other two questions to ask you to deal with. Are there any tool available to avoid lifting heavy books? One thought was a Kindle, but that might be too simple.
Sorry, lifting books.
Any tool available to avoid lifting heavy balls?
I was going to say James Grabber, but I don't know whether it quite does that. Does it do any heavy books?
Get a Kindle.
Get a Kindle. Yeah, other brands are available.
And Tina, another question was covering the cost of personal trainer.
How do I cover it?
Yes.
It was, I covered it myself, full disclosure. I think it was a choice that I had to make because I found that to get the kind of additional support that I needed, I had to fund it through my own pocket, but I was able to have a chat with the PT when I started with her, and I was like able to negotiate a price because I told her finding someone who's able to meet my needs is very difficult. The costs that I face in my day-to-day life are, far more than your typical client. So, can we do a discounted rate? So she does offer me. I pay £50 an hour, and she offers me sort of every 6 PT sessions for free. So those kinds of. So it is difficult, but if it's something that you feel that's important to you and you want to prioritise, that's a way of covering it. It's one of the things that I'm trying to talk with my local councillors, because I get a direct payments to help with funding my social care and support, a way if I could use some of that budget to pay for it, because it will increase my independence and will increase my capabilities if I can increase my strength, my mobility. So I'm exploring ways that if I can use my personal health budget, which I use to fund carers and caring support, if I can use that to fund other means of support for my day-to-day living. So it can be expensive, but there are ways around it if you want to have those conversations.
And a question, I'm not sure which of you should cover, but description of being waiting 10 months for a custom wheelchair for a 5-year-old and still waiting. Is this normal for the NHS? Now, wheelchair is a tricky issue. It's beyond the NHS. I'm sure you have some experience and comments you managed to add.
So just for clarity, someone's been waiting for 10 months, is it, for a 5-year-old's wheelchair? I think that, again, unfortunately, it's so often actually just continually communicating and expressing the impact of such timescales will have on the individual is unfortunately the best advice I can give, because so often the person on the other end of that supply chain will just be seeing an order number, and in reality you can humanise that experience and say anything to start to make them realise that actually this chair is not going to become unsuitable for the individual soon, but also this is 10 months without X, Y, and Z, which could have been providing great independence to the individual. That would be my first thing to do. My mum is a great letter writer, and she thankfully passed on some letter writing skills to me, and it comes in handy. Just sending emails to people just to explain the situation of certain things and the impact that has, and hopefully that's part of it. Of course, with the electronic microchip shortages and things, supply of certain things is a struggle in itself, so obviously you might not be able to have a dramatic impact on that side of things, but largely speaking, if it's something on the human side, hopefully just poking them a bit can help.
And I'm going to wrap up the last 4 questions into one, because there are many questions about the care pathway and the what's next for children, for other types, etc.
So first, a pseudo fracture is an incomplete halfway fracture. So a full fracture is across both vortices, both sides of the bone. This is just halfway. So the BBS and I took a punt. We wanted to say we could do an adult care pathway for severe OI, including type 3. So now Cambridge is going to lead type 1 pathway, and then the paediatricians already have a pathway, I think, among specialised centres, but that sort of got a bit muddy, and it didn't quite finish. So I think this will be an example for the paediatricians to then actually do what we've done with adult care and actually not worry about the detail, look at the main concepts, and actually not make it so pharmacologically focused, but actually do everything. I think there was a question about Wales, was there?
Again, whether the pathway would cover Wales.
Yes, it covers Wales, so we've got Cardiff. It's NHS. Anywhere where there's an NHS badge, we will cover. We didn't get any Northern Ireland sites in the first round. It was quite hard to get the 23, but we'll go to Northern Ireland.
And I'm just being stomachs are probably rumbling. Down the bottom, there were some bits that really picked up on what you highlighted, and I think you articulated that really well, that type 1 seems to get dismissed, even though type 1 suffer multiple fractures and pain. So you were outlining using that information to take it forward, and the question here is, are there any research pathways for type 1?
Specifically, I think that's more, is it research pathways or planning specific care pathways?
Research.
Okay. So, specifically for type 1, so I can only speak for the research that we're carrying out in partnership with our partner company. So we're examining the potential for cetrusumab to be a possible therapy for type 1s, type 3 and type 4. But we don't know what the ultimate label would look like, so that's something we'll have to know at the end of that research. So it's we've just initiated phase 3, so it's too early to say, but ideally it will be, we hope, something that could have clinical utility in type 1.
And the last question about the survey was whether you picked up more cases of type 1 in certain areas of the UK, or whether it evenly spread.
That's a really interesting question. That was a super question. We haven't yet, because we haven't really done the deep dive. I presented the aggregated data for the UK. Once we go further in, I think then we'll be able to look, and it would be a very interesting question to understand whether there are pockets of specific types. So I think that's a question that we not yet, but watch this space, and if we did find something, that's something that would be worth digging into.
Lovely. Now, I'm conscious we could sit here in endless discussion. I'm going to invite you to take that discussion to lunch, because that's really where we need to think about moving to next. And I think we're about to put up perhaps perhaps not just a reminder. One thing is, don't go straight to lunch if you have children to collect. Because they'll be there starving, so do remember to take that as well. We'll be very careful. And then encourage you all, and according to there's the BBS AGM, for all those of you who are members, please endeavour to be back by then, and then we have some